giving them the tools to really become independent and not trying to do it for them or fix it for them, right? And having them experience that. Because when you give your child a level of independence and responsibility, this self-confidence that can grow from being independent is invaluable. That learning repetition and that learning opportunity to grow and get better really is something that develops their self-esteem, their self-respect, right? Their pride in everything that they have, and just their overall feeling of oh my gosh, I can do this by myself, right? And then this desire to motivate themselves to do other things on their own will only grow. Welcome to another episode of the Black Belt Parenting Podcast. Today I'm excited to bring to you the topic of independence, which I also like to call for parents letting go. So parenting really begins with total dependence, right? Like we talked about this earlier, of having this creature with you and who's wholly dependent on you for everything, for survival. And I used to joke around with other moms and be like, we made it through 3 months. They're still alive. We're doing a great job, because it really feels like so touch and go in the beginning. And you feel so scared about having this person who's completely reliant on you. Then it becomes this exercise in letting go, right? Which I think is particularly hard as a parent. And as I go through each and every year, I realize how much letting go you have to do, gradually, and how it becomes more expansive and how it really affects you emotionally. So I understand this topic is really difficult for people because, we're attached to our kids and we love them so much and we want to be with them all the time. And this feeling of helping them is really something that as a parent you'll never ever let go of, right? And you hope that they'll always come back to you if they need anything. But creating this line of letting go and creating these individual creatures is really an exercise that you have to continually practice. So I really like this topic, and when I was preparing for this episode, I had to really sit down and think about how we implement this in martial arts and how we can compare and contrast it to parenting. But I kept always going back to just my own parenting and, how difficult it is. But I hope this episode is great in the way that it opens up a conversation for people to, put letting go into practice on a daily basis, right? So, there's that saying where, you can do the activity for your kid, you can catch the fish for your kids, right? Or you can teach them how to fish, right? And I like to always go back to that because I think it's really important that we are their role models and their teachers in becoming really independent and self-sufficient creatures, right? The sooner we start working on this, the easier the child will have it when they're off on their own. From the moment that they're able to kind of do anything on their own, it's really helpful for us to stop and take a moment to take the time to teach. Parents are children's first teachers, right? And once you take that on, and you put it into practice, right, then your child will be able to take on a whole ton and a whole slew and hopefully become and surpass their teacher, which I always hope my students do, and become a better person than you could ever be, right? Because hopefully with each generation we evolve and we get better. So going back to my experience as a martial artist, I thought about how we create independence on the training floor. And so, what it always came back to for me was when I look at the different phases of training here at the school. So we have 3 separate phases of training in martial arts here at our school. It really is dependent on, the student's level of proficiency and their ability to understand the techniques and implement them, right? So in the first phase of training, of course, right, the students are fully dependent on the instructor, right? So in this phase of training, they're really coming in as a blank slate, hopefully, right? As much as they can, like depending on where they are in their martial arts training, but for the most part, when people come into the school, right, they're a blank slate. And here, they're really dependent on the instructor to show them from the most basic skills of how to do an exercise, how to even walk onto the training floor, right? How to behave in the classroom. And when it comes to learning, like they have to be shown things in great detail, and it has to be broken down in steps so that they can learn it properly, right? When we're holding pads for them, right, we're not expecting them to hold pads right away. We have to actually teach them how to hold pads for their partners. There has to be set clear expectations. So, they may not know what the expectation is, so we have to create the standard for them. And we always have to demonstrate things consistently. So, there are some students, right, maybe you could show it one time, but then you always have to keep repeating it and demonstrating it so that they get the little details and implement those details as they go, right? But in the beginning stages, we're just looking for this really big overall, like gross understanding of what we're trying to accomplish. I really love the first phase of training because it's like when your child is learning how to walk, like they're learning like the essence of like everything, the basics. And it's an essential part. It's an essential time because it's really the teaching phase. And this is where you take the time slowly to have them really internalize everything and kind of take it in as their own, right? And it requires continuous repetition and consistency. So if you don't have that, right, the basic foundation of their skills is going to be lacking if they're not coming to class consistently, and if you're not showing them, how to fix basic little things like your stance or footwork, right? Or how to hold your hands. Those are things people they want to rush through those things, but those are the basic foundations from which all technique is born. So in phase 1, you're very dependent on your instructor. This is where you're really paying attention to everything, and hopefully the students take this part of their training very seriously. A lot of people, like I said, want to rush through it, and I often think this is where you really need to take the time and slow down. And then also, it doesn't hurt sometimes when you're even in the higher levels to go back to phase 1, because maybe sometimes you need to fix a little bit of some of your basics, right? So in the phase 1 of your training, you're really dependent on your instructor. You're really dependent on sort of the basic skills. And here is where you're learning, really internalizing it, trying to get sort of master little things. Then you move to phase 2, right? Here you're feeling a little bit more confidence, right? You're coming into more of an independent state where the instructors don't have to really lay out every single detail for you, because you kind of have a little bit more of the language that's required, right? You've been here enough where when an instructor tells you a technique, you know what they mean, right? It is like learning another language. So you're like, oh, I know that. And you can demonstrate whatever they're asking you to do. At the same time, you're doing more partner drills where you're responsible for your partner and you're holding for them. You're doing light partner drills where you're going with each other. It's not really sparring, right? And you're given more freedom with your techniques. So instead of let's just say, for example, the instructor is counting out repetitions where, one partner's holding a pad and the other person's performing the technique, and the instructor goes 1 and you do the technique. The instructors will give you a time limit and they'll allow you to practice that technique on your own. Right? So you're kind of given a little bit more freedom, and you two can work together and communicate with each other because you understand the language and you understand how to hold properly. So this more subtle independence is given to you in phase 2. Within this phase 2, you're also then starting to do a little light sparring, right? So here you can make a little bit more contact. You're more responsible to defend yourself we have more confidence in the sense that you're able to figure out what you have to do and that you'll communicate to your partner if something's not right? Or if you feel like it's not going okay, but we're still there supervising and making sure that people have control and that they're not using too much power, because I think those things like intensity and control come when you have a little bit more of a maturity within your training. At the same time, we're still continuing repetition of technique, again, within maybe higher level difficulty, but the repetition of the same technique is still the same. So instead of maybe doing jab on a pad, you're doing it on your partner. You're seeing the different targets on an actual human being versus just a pad, right? So the application is very different. And in addition to that, we're adding more difficult techniques where we feel like we can build upon the basic foundation that we've established in phase 1. So again, with more consistency, you're given a little bit more independence. And then finally, in the phase 3 of your training, this is sort of like the ultimate part of your training where you're now given more of a leadership role, right? Within our kids program, this is where we expect the kids to now assist in their lower level classes, lead stretches. They're so well versed now in the language of the protocol in the beginning of class that we're allowing them to kind of help out in the lower phases of training as well as in the younger peer classes. With that, as you teach, so do you learn, right? So we always make it a point to let them know, listen, yes, you're assisting and you're a leader, but while you're doing that, you're actually increasing your level of learning. So the highest level of teaching actually is the highest level of learning as well, right? All the best instructors in the school have been homegrown and are continual learners, right? Our highest level learners. And because they assist, they get to pay attention to the details while they're teaching, and then they apply it to their own training. So again, in phase 3, just like we're building upon in phase 2, now your language of learning is much more intricate, much more comprehensive, right? So you're able to kind of build upon all of the foundation that you've learned in phase 1 and phase 2. We can now make the techniques more difficult, more intricate. Sparring becomes much more independent because you have a greater understanding of control, power. You know when to go hard, how to move, when to go lightly. You have a really good understanding of the different partners you might encounter. And simultaneously, our expectations of you are higher. So your fitness level needs to be better. The respect and discipline for your training, for your instructors, for your peers, that expectation is much higher. And then we also have expectations of your fitness goals, right? So within our phase 3 level of training for our higher level kids, these kids are expected to do close to 100 of each exercise because for black belt, they need to do that, right? So the intensity of their push-ups, of their sit-ups, it grows, right? And our expectation is that you're not just doing that when you come to do martial arts, you're doing that outside of class. So you're actually supplementing your martial arts training because the level of expectation is higher. And then, of course, there's this higher level in the application of your techniques, right? So your ability to land a punch or a kick, or your ability to actually apply it and do it properly and do it with good timing is expected, right? You may not notice it, but it does definitely increase in phase 3. And then finally, there's more of an individual self-expression of techniques, right? So now you've kind of been able to internalize all the learning and you're able to express it in a way that only you can do it, according to your body type, according to how you fundamentally understand it for yourself. I like to use, for example, I'm really small. I'm like maybe 5'1" now. I think I shrunk. But, me going versus a 6 foot tall person is going to be really different versus me versus like someone who's about my size, right? So my expression of my technique, like what I like to use for myself, is going to be very different than what somebody else my size might do or somebody who's bigger than me might do. But because of the long-standing training that I've done, right, I kind of seen over time what's been working for me and what I really like to use, what I favor. So that self-expression really comes in the phase 3 level of training, and your independence when it comes to your training. Your instructors are less paying attention to you in the sense of like, we kind of trust you a little bit more in the sense that we know that you understand those things, right? And so while we still do monitor and challenge you, right, there's a little bit less of guarding and helicoptering over you. And it's really important to understand that I think I've said it through each phase, but as students move from rank to rank, we're not just looking at like the physical expression of their growth, but we're looking at the mental and emotional growth as well, right? So the student's ability to kind of self-correct, have self-awareness, self-evaluate, right, and self-motivate become indicators of their ability to move up in rank. Some students will always be like, I've been here a long time. I can throw a jab, and we do this all the time. Kids are always saying that. We do this. I've seen this so many times, right? But we're not just looking at the technique, right? We're looking at your ability to do all those things I just talked about, right? Are you being self-motivated, right? Are you just looking for outside praise, right? Are you self-correcting? Are you being humble? Are you being a learner? Are you helping out your peers? Are you helping the group get better? All of those things play a role in having the kids advance level and actually have them be more independent in their training. If you're not able to kind of self-motivate, we can't really move you up because we can't always be there to make you do better. You should have to want to do that by yourself, right? That's part of being independent. Those are sort of the things that came to mind when I was thinking about letting go as a coach and also creating independence in our own students, right? And I think it's a really important quality in martial arts, right? Because it's good to have coaches. I think it's very important to have coaches. I think they're there to support you and be the people that will cheerlead you through things, right? But independent of them, you can't wholly rely on them completely for your growth. Like, it has to be a two-way street. So that independence is very important in your own personal growth. So when I thought about it, like applying it to the home life, it was really like the same kind of thing, right? It's very transferable to the home in that, we start at the level when the kids are really young, when we have them as babies and they're wholly dependent on you for everything, for their feeding, for their sleeping, for just survival, right? And you being there is really important. And that's sort of like phase 1. I think sometimes the letting go period for people becomes a little bit blurry, because like with martial arts, it's like very clear, right? There's phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and this is where we do this, this, and this. When you have kids, it's dependent on the child, right? And this is where it's really important to get to know your kids. And when they're capable of doing something on their own, becomes dependent on where they are in their learning process, their personality, their temperament, their readiness, right? And their willingness, right? So, it's sort of standard through their developmental stages that as they grow, their responsibility should increase. I mean, even when they're really, really tiny, just having them clean up their toys and put them in a box is a way of creating independence for them. When you're in your living room and they're playing with their Legos or they're playing with their puzzle pieces, and it's time to go eat dinner, like having a box and being like, okay, let's help mommy put these away, right? And then having them understand that, this is a cleanup process, right? And it later on, like they'll be able to clean up their toys on their own, right? So from very little, you can start this independence process. I think where parents and where I've gone wrong in the past is our lives are so busy that it's so much easier to do things for your kids than to take the time to teach them to do it and wait for them to really get it. the hardest part of teaching sometimes is not, it's like, just going to grab the pad. I'm going to hold it for you, because it's faster and it's easier and it's more convenient and it saves time, like all those things. And as the world gets busier and we have more responsibilities and we're doing things, I've done it. Like, I'll just do it. I'll put my kids' shoes on. We'll run out. They don't take the time to learn it. Sometimes we have to remind ourselves that, like, us putting in the investment of time to teach them a skill will help us later, right? Will help them later. So as you get to know your kids and you can see, like, their capabilities increase, like, they can push in their chair, they can put their dishes in the sink, they can throw things out in the garbage. Oh no, look at this. They can sweep the floor. They can empty the laundry basket and fill up their drawers. They can start folding their clothes, right? These are the times when you have to figure out a time and a space where you're going to sit down with them and do it together and then have them learn it. The initial period is a huge time investment for parents, right? Teaching your kids to make a bed, right? Showing them how to do it several times so that they understand how to do it, and then having them do it by themselves while you're standing there. That's a lot of time, right? It takes a lot of time for them sometimes to get it. But we have to make sure that we make that investment of that time so that they get it. And then at the same time, be happy when they do it, even if it's sloppy. So I was talking to Miss Tara about this, and she always brings up the story of when she showed her first daughter how to make her bed, and that her daughter would then start making her bed, and there would be half of the blanket would be hanging off the bed, and then half of it would still be there, and there'd be a slew of stuffed animals all over the place. And the urge to not fix it and just leave it. That's your child's masterpiece and piece of, like, that's their first time trying to make their bed. Like, let them be proud of themselves and let them be proud of their independence and praise them for actually taking responsibility for something in their lives, right? And learning how to do it. And guess what? With every repetition, just like every repetition in martial arts, that bed making got better and better. And I'll tell you something about this kid. She's now a mom. She's got 3 kids of her own. Her house is spotless, as I'm told. And she can make a good bed, right? And she's making 3 of them now because she's got 3 kids. So, like, this is what I'm talking about, is like just giving them the tools to really become independent and not trying to, like, do it for them or fix it for them, right? And having them experience that. Because when you give your child a level of independence and responsibility, the self-confidence that can grow from being independent is invaluable, right? That learning repetition and that learning opportunity to grow and get better really is something that develops their self-esteem, their self-respect, right? Their pride in everything that they have, and just their overall feeling of like, oh my gosh, I can do this by myself, right? And then this desire to motivate themselves to do other things on their own will only grow. And so that investment of time is not just for them to learn a skill, but it's also for them to grow in their self-motivation, their self-confidence, their pride, right? So it's so invaluable, right? And I think that because we're so busy, sometimes we forget that. And, I just feel like even here at the school, like, I'll see the parents, like, and when they'll try and do all the things for their kids, or, they'll try and rush them into class without having them put away their shoes or their jacket. Oh, no, I'll do it for you. You're late. And sometimes I'll just stop them and I'll be like, no, like, they have to do these things and they have to experience the repercussions if something doesn't go their way, so that they learn the responsibility of it and they become more independent in their actions and also in the sort of like the consequences of their actions. So I think that them doing for themselves really serves them in a really, really great way. In order to do that, right, and I kind of want to backtrack a little bit, it's like you have to see what you can do and figure out with your child when they're ready to do it. Some kids may not be ready at a certain point to take something on. So set a lower expectation, right? And then increase the expectation as it goes. It will lighten your load, and it will also give them a sense of, independence, right? And it will also give them this level of feeling of contribution. So you're constantly going to have to reevaluate and then communicate with them, and then constantly sit down and teach, and then set different expectations as time goes on. And then later, you'll be able to trust them a little bit more with each and every responsibility. So, as your kids get older, of course, the responsibilities will increase. So, and I like to use as an example, my older daughter turned 14, and she wanted to kind of do things alone with her friends, but I had to see that she was capable of going out, maybe to go shopping or go into the city. I had to see that she hit certain expectations for me, where she would communicate with me, where she would constantly tell me where she was, that she showed me that she could be safe and she could know how to be aware out in the world, that she was kind of fulfilling the expectations that I had before I allowed her to do anything on her own. When I felt like I could trust her, then I let her go out and I gave her a little bit more responsibility, and I was so proud to see her go out on her own, go into the city by herself, manage all of the chaos of New York City, and be safe, be aware, not be on her phone. Little things like that, like seeing her do that, be in constant communication with me, tell me where she's at, and I felt more comfortable. I felt like, listen, she can do this and I can give her more to do, and she can take on more stuff, right? And so both of us she gained more confidence, right? I gained more confidence, of her. And then together, our relationship grew because she felt like I could trust her. And in turn, I felt like she could trust me because she felt like mom believes in me, So it's a two-way street. And so you can't even stress enough, that when kids feel like you can trust them to do things, how they grow, how they grow as people, and how they become more aware of that they're becoming independent and how they want it. They desire it. That increased trust in themselves gets larger. And again, that self-confidence is much better, and their ability to be out in the world and kind of be resourceful grows. So don't rob them of the opportunity to learn from their mistakes when they're independent. This is a time where people are so scared because there's so much information of what can happen to your kids that is bad, right? And there's less information of what can happen for your kids that is good. We tend to hold on to things that scare us, and it drives us to not let our kids do things by themselves. Where, I'm from Generation X, and, there are definitely impediments to the way we were raised because we were left alone. But one of the things that I think that we got from having to be by ourselves was this sense of, I got to take care of myself and figure things out. And that resourcefulness only came from being left alone. Of course, you want to set ground rules and expectations and safety standards before you do that for your children. But once you've kind of seen that they're able to do things and take it on themselves, the part of letting go becomes crucial. And letting go requires trust, right? So trust in your children, trust in yourself as a parent and in what you've given them as tools, and allow them to kind of take on the world, because only then can they grow. So I hope that this episode was really great for you and kind of triggered you in thinking about how you can help your kids become more independent, right? And how it can help you in your family dynamic, because in this way, you're not taking on all the burdens, right? I feel like moms are really taking on a lot, and having your kids be more independent and be contributors in the household can really be such a saving grace for the whole family, right? Everybody can feel like they're individuals who are part of a greater whole, right? And once you have that, the family can become only that more powerful. So, let's see what you guys have to say about how you're going to make your kids more independent. In the comments below, please let me know what you're doing, how old your kids are, and what responsibilities they have in your house, and how they're independent and how proud you are of them. For more information on this podcast, please log on to blackbeltparentingpodcast.com. And don't forget to subscribe to wherever you're watching or listening to this show on. Remember, stay resilient, stay compassionate, and always strive to be the best version of yourself. And keep nurturing those black belt parenting skills. The Black Belt Parenting Podcast is produced and recorded by Press Record Studios.